I moved to Massachusetts shortly after finishing college, finding my dream job there. I've always lived on the East Coast, but that was quite a drive from North Carolina for one person. But once I got there, I fell in love with the city, and that's still true to this day, but in 2022, my college graduating class was having a 10-year reunion that I was excited to attend. It was supposed to be in 2021, technically, but we had pushed it back a year just to be safe. So, I was going to be making the drive back down to my hometown to see some family and friends. But because I had been in Mass for so long and gotten used to the surrounding area, I decided to take a bit of a longer route to see more new sights. I think I saw more than I bargained for. Instead of taking the interstate, I went for a route that was more focused on the rural scenery. I left early in the morning, packing my little hatchback with my belongings, a few snacks and drinks, and my excited terrier Daisy. She loved car rides, and was just ready to bounce around the car all day, I'm sure. I had my GPS on to keep a guide going, but I also wasn't too concerned about following it. The actual reunion wouldn't be for 2 days, giving me plenty of time to take in the sights. I was also staying with my parents, who were happy to have me home too, so I had some time on my hands. The drive started out perfectly. It was a sunny day, so we had the windows cracked and Daisy was enjoying herself. It wasn't until about 3 p.m. that the sky suddenly darkened dramatically. I knew the weather where I lived was nice, but I didn't even consider weather conditions along the way, and we were about to drive right through a storm. Within about half an hour since it darkened, it began to downpour. The rain was so heavy that my wiper blades couldn't keep up. I slowed down quite a bit, barely able to see in front of me. Daisy was now lying in the seat watching me. She's okay with rain and water, but not so much the roaring thunder. I drove like this for another hour before I decided I needed to stop. I wasn't making much progress at that speed, and it really wasn't safe, no matter what road I was on. I was concerned about hitting another car or an animal or even someone hitting me. I was in a smaller car after all, so I drove even slower, turning on my hazard lights and looking out for exits. I was hoping to find somewhere off the highway to stop until the storm let up, to check in with my parents, and maybe grab an actual meal. I was too excited to get on the road, so I hadn't had much of a breakfast. Finally, I saw a familiar sign indicating food places and took the next exit. I could go left or right at the stop sign off the highway, but I couldn't see anything in either direction. I decided to go right, but the only thing I saw that way after a mile or two down the road was an old-looking gas station, where the building still stood, but the pump itself was gone. That place was long closed. I was doing okay, however. I still had plenty of gas and neither of us were starving, so I decided to just wait it out where we were. I checked my phone, and unfortunately I didn't have a signal, but I at least tried to send a text to my mom, thinking that it would send when it could. I even went back to my GPS, and it said that it was looking for a location. I remember thinking, man, this storm is really brutal. So, Daisy and I stayed in the car for some time, sharing a few pieces of jerky I had stashed away while I played a game on my phone. One of the few things I could do. I don't remember exactly how long I was there, maybe half an hour or so, before I noticed the rain starting to let up. It turned into just a light drizzle. But where the rain stopped, a fog started creeping in. I rolled down the window and was shocked by just how much cooler it was from when we left. However, visibility was much better, so I figured I should go back the way I came and check out the other side of the highway, thinking maybe I would find the restaurants and some civilization that way. Back down the other way, however, it was just as desolate looking. I was sure that I saw a sign off the highway that had 2 places listed on the food and lodging sign. Granted, I didn't recognize either place listed, so I assumed that it was just a local thing. Either way, where were they? I went a while down that same road until I finally happened to see a few houses pop up. I figured it was probably one of those little towns that just had the locals in it, but hoped they might at least have a little convenience store or something. I would once again stand corrected. I pulled through the little side street and saw several small houses in a row on each side. But this is where it started getting weird. Some of the houses had some lawn decorations in them, a flag, a flamingo. One had a lawn chair and a small tricycle in the yard. One house had the front window and the door wide open. My first thought was that this must be one of those neighborhoods where no one locks their doors. It was cute at first, seeing a small community like that, but I assumed that I would at least run into someone or see someone in the area. Surely someone had to be nearby the house that had the door wide open, right? I stopped in front of the house and waited a few seconds, but no one ever came out of the house, or from the side. That's when I actually started looking closer at the houses. They all looked pretty worn with time. I could see the shingles sticking up on the house with the door open. Another one had what I first thought were thick curtains in the window, but it was actually a board. The siding was peeling and washed out, clearly fading with time. The yard was overgrown but not unruly. I would guess that it had been mowed probably a month or 2 prior. I kept driving until I came across a small yellow building that had a sign by the door that said something like Mauve's Eatery, or maybe it was Maze. It was an uncommon name that started with an M, I remember that much. I stopped in the small lot in front of it and got out, leaving the window cracked for Daisy. I wasn't going to assume that dogs were allowed inside. Turns out, I didn't need to worry about that, however, because it too was empty. But that place looked like it had been left in a rush. There were coffee mugs scattered across a few tables. One had a plate with what I think was bread on it. It was so dehydrated and shriveled up that I couldn't make it out entirely. There were a few empty plates on the bar, and the floor still had trash and debris on it. I immediately felt like something was wrong. With this place, or with myself. I started feeling nauseated and lightheaded, and my body started feeling so light that I remember grabbing the booth, thinking I was going to float away. I was worried that I was about to pass out, because I had never felt like this before. I took a few deep breaths, and when I had my bearings back, I ran back to my car, where I found Daisy scratching incessantly and whimpering at the window. She didn't do that, even if she had to go to the bathroom. I jumped back into the car and sat there with my eyes closed, trying to relax. And that's when I noticed Daisy was trembling and still whimpering. I tried to be reasonable, though, and hooked her leash to her harness and opened the door, checking if maybe she did need to go. She didn't budge. So, I grabbed her and got out of the car with her. Her tail remained down in between her legs and didn't move from where she was. I watched her as she stared over at the building, still shaking and whimpering. Something was now freaking her out. Something I couldn't see, but I sure as hell felt it. Something was very wrong with that place. I scooped her back up, putting her in the passenger seat, and got in. Daisy didn't stop whimpering until we were back at the highway entrance ramp, and, to be honest, I was still feeling sick. My heart rate was skyrocketing too, until we were gone. What's even worse is that I didn't have GPS service until I was back on the highway. Thankfully, I at least knew the direction that I needed to go and drove for probably 10 to 15 minutes before it came back. I kept driving until I saw a food sign with modern places that I recognized. I had never been more thankful for a Taco Bell. I stopped to finally decompress for a moment and tried to look up where we were on my phone's map. Here's where it gets confusing. According to Google Maps, that place does not exist. Usually it shows the cities or small gray buildings or something indicating that something was there, but it was empty. Just green for fields of grass. How is that possible? I know that things change, places close and new places pop up, but we're talking about a whole little town just completely gone. The rest of my drive went fine. No weird towns and no weird feelings. I told my parents about it. My dad was typically really good with directions, but neither could really place the location. They also found it strange that it wasn't on Google either. My dad even pulled out his old atlas and was studying the maps along the route that I told him, and there was no indication of any place being along that highway. It clearly existed because I saw it with my own eyes, but this place just did not exist anywhere. Like it was just wiped off the face of the earth at some point. Then I started thinking about how everything was left, other than the grass, and I got creeped out. It was as if it was literally wiped away, and everyone disappeared in the same way without a trace, without any plans. And when I went back home the next week, I took the same path, hoping to find the town again to take some photos of it as proof, but I never found it. The food and lodging sign that I saw from the other direction wasn't even there. So, my question is, did this place, this little mysterious town in the middle of nowhere, truly not exist? Was it not supposed to be in this reality? Is that why I myself started feeling light, and why my dog was afraid of the place? I still do wonder if Daisy saw something that day that I couldn't. And to be honest, I don't know what terrifies me more about that place. I had to take a long trip across the country in my early 20s. I was living in Kentucky and moving to Oregon to be with my girlfriend. I wasn't having much luck with the jobs where I was, but my girlfriend said that she could help me get a job with her. In fact, I had 2 phone interviews before I made the move, so I was feeling good about the whole thing. The only issue is, as you can imagine, that it's a long drive, and I was going to be doing it alone. I had a small truck, so I put everything in the back that I could, and everything else I donated or sold to have that little extra cash in my pocket. I knew I was going to have to stop a few times, and at least once or twice to sleep too, but I prepared the best I could for it. I had a bench seat in my truck, so the plan was to just sleep in there and save my money instead of getting a hotel room. This story took place during the time I was driving through western Kansas. It was already dark, and I didn't normally stay up past 10, maybe 11 on a crazy night. At this point, it was about 1 in the morning, and as you know, Kansas is flat and boring. It was not doing much in ways of keeping me awake. I knew I was going to need to sleep soon. I was in the middle of a long stretch of highway with no indication of a decent town coming up anytime soon. My only options were to keep driving and hope that something popped up on the signs, or just stop where I was. I went with the latter. The part of the highway I was on was surrounded on both sides by cornfields. I hadn't seen another car in a few hours, and the road was wide enough that I felt comfortable pulling over and just sleeping there. I certainly felt better about stopping and sleeping in my locked truck than I did risking further driving while drowsy. So I pulled over enough that part of my truck was in the grass. I texted my girlfriend and told her I was stopping for the night, and then cracked my windows since it was nice outside. I was doing the drive in early August, so it was pretty warm, but thankfully that night there was a decent breeze. I also wasn't under any streetlights, so it was pretty dark, except for the stars above. I got myself situated in my seat, lying down, patting myself on the back for keeping a pillow in the seat for this very reason. I was just starting to drift off, being right in that in-between state where I was aware of my body and the sounds of the crickets outside, but also dreaming. Until I started hearing odd sounds that didn't fit into whatever I was dreaming about. It caught my attention enough to wake me up. I remember lying there, staring at the roof and just listening. The sound was consistent, but not quite rhythmic. I figured it was probably just a deer or something similar walking through the cornfields, so I tried to go back to sleep. That is when I was startled by a weird groaning sound. It didn't sound right. It certainly didn't sound like something from a human either. Maybe whatever was walking around out there was injured. I continued to listen, and after a thud, there was one more groan, then the rustling continued. Now, paying more attention to the sound, it sounded like something was being dragged. Like something heavy was being pulled along the ground. But this is where my stupidity kicked in. I got too curious. I still didn't know what was making that groaning sound, and even though I was leaning towards an animal, I wanted to check it out, and maybe see if somebody needed help. It was a long shot, sure, being in the middle of nowhere, but I was going to feel bad if I just left someone like that. I sat up in my truck and looked around to see if I might see something, but no dice. So I grabbed the flashlight in my glove compartment. I was trying to conserve my phone battery since I couldn't charge it overnight. Then I got out to look around. I scanned the cornfields with my flashlight, and finally I spotted a patch in the corn on the passenger side of my car that was moving. I could see the stalk swaying from the top. I didn't scare easily, and still being curious, I walked toward the patch. Now, I've never walked through a cornfield before, so I wasn't expecting it to be as dense as it was. I could barely make out the line in front of me. The leaves kept catching on my clothes, and the stalks didn't have much give to them. I almost turned around just because of how difficult it was, and not to mention I was technically trespassing. But then I came across a small patch that was broken or stepped over. I may not know much about farming, but I had a feeling that this was not intentional. When I approached the broken patch, I noticed from there that there was a trail being made to the left, leaving behind more broken trails. I followed it, keeping my flashlight pointed to the ground. The more I walked, the more I started hearing new sounds. The sound of crunching. But the crunching was wet and messy, almost like someone chewing on something crunchy with their mouth open. It made me more curious, but I was also starting to become on edge. This was making me feel like this was less likely a human, but for some reason, I just kept going. Finally, I was able to make out a dark lump toward the ground that was moving. It was clearly something, but I couldn't tell what it was. It looked like it partially had its back to me, but it was big, based on how broad its back and shoulders were. Bigger than a coyote or a dog and the wrong shape for a deer. Maybe even the size of a bear. But I don't think there are bears roaming around in Kansas cornfields. Its movements were strange, kind of jerky, but also precise. And from what I could see, it appeared to be positioned over another animal that was lying motionless on the ground. That's when the creature stood up, and I noticed that the look of it was just all wrong. It had really thin legs compared to its large body, and it seemed kind of crooked. It had 2 bend points, but also appeared bowed. It didn't look possible that this thing should be able to walk. That's when I noticed the sound that I was hearing. The creature leaned over the animal on the ground and ripped a part of it off and then started gnawing. It ripped off its limb with its own hands. The sound and witnessing that caused me to gag, which unfortunately was audible. The creature stopped and looked back at me. It stayed completely still as we both stared at each other. I then pointed the flashlight at it, because it already knew I was there anyway, and I could make out the face a little more. It had a long snout like that of a dog or a bear, but its face only had small patches of fur, like it was balding. The eyes just appeared as an endless black hole. Something told me that I needed to get the hell out of there. I don't know why it didn't lunge at me already, but I took it as my chance to get away. I ran back the way I came from, following that same path, and I even passed it. I was too freaked out to pay attention until I told myself that I needed to just get back to my car, not keep running. I turned to the right and ran out of the field, realizing I had actually passed where my car was. I ran back to the car, thankful that I left the keys in the ignition, and immediately started it. I locked the doors and rolled the windows up at the same time, and then just gunned it down the road. That was enough excitement for me to keep going for, I think, what was another 70 miles, until I got to the closest thing to a city as I could. I stopped in the parking lot of a gas station, and I tried really hard to compose myself. I was a grown-ass man, and I had never been so scared in my life. Something about that thing was not right. I have no idea what it was, but I know that it was nothing good. I freaked myself out even more when I thought about just how isolated I was at that moment. I was stopped somewhere on some highway in someone's cornfield, essentially, and I had just discovered something I had never experienced or seen before. I have no doubts that thing could have killed me, but for some reason, all it did was stare at me. If it would have done something, I'm not sure that anyone would have ever even found my body. I didn't give my girlfriend my exact location when I texted her. I ended up telling her about it the next morning, and she also agreed that it seemed very strange and unnatural. Together, we had no idea what it could have been. I did stop once more to sleep when I got to Utah, but that time I slept in a Walmart parking lot. Nowhere near the middle of nowhere, Kansas, and nowhere near those creepy corn stalks. And now that I'm living comfortably in Oregon, I think I'll just fly back so I can avoid Kansas altogether. Anytime I hear the term middle of nowhere, the absolute first thing that comes to mind is Skinwalker Ranch. This 512-acre plot of land in Utah County, Utah, has no shortage of stories surrounding the very remote and mysterious, quote, ranch. It has been dubbed a hotbed of UFO activity, bizarre cryptid creatures, or aliens, whichever you want to label some of them. It's also known for the strange livestock mutilations that occur fairly frequently, if some of the accounts are true. There are also no ends to the conspiracy theories regarding Skinwalker Ranch and ties to the US government, and most specifically the military. Regardless of what you believe or don't believe, just the sheer amount of lore around Skinwalker Ranch has to have you asking some questions about just what might be real, and what is just hysteria, paranoia, and intentional misinformation put out for the sole purpose of entertainment and distraction. The place is also known for the History Channel series The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch, where they investigate the alleged paranormal events that often take place at the enigmatic ranch. Multiple owners of the property, including current owner Brandon Fugel of Adamantium Real Estate LLC, have spent a lot of time and money investigating the strange occurrences that reportedly happen all over the infamous land. Even the name of the ranch itself is drawn from the ancient lore of the Navajo and other native peoples, and refers to twisted shaman that can shapeshift and possess the bodies of animals. Which, in itself, is a topic that we could write up for probably a half-hour video, if we really tried, just because of the amount of material available on the topic. Let's begin by looking at some of the most reported and commonly associated phenomena with Skinwalker Ranch: UFO sightings. I absolutely love the topic of UFOs, and the thought of other life in the universe does not scare me, it excites me. And to think that they visit us is a truly exciting thing for me. Of course, when most people think of such things, they think of the abduction stories, experiments being performed, etc. In the 1950s, the entire area was dubbed as UFO Alley, and Skinwalker Ranch was known as UFO Ranch because of its 50-year history of sightings. In the 1970s, the UFO reports in Uintah County were made public, and this sparked a lot of interest in the ranch. People began coming to investigate all manner of strange phenomena, such as UFO sightings, the livestock mutilations, and strange creatures with glowing red eyes that were unscathed by bullets when people tried to shoot them. Also, there were reports of invisible devices that were emitting dangerous electromagnetic fields. The earliest reports of the ranch began in 1966, with the tales of a family that had bought the property and then began to experience strange and unsettling things. The ranch's location in Uintah County is such that it borders the Uintah and Ouray Indian reservations, so there's undoubtedly a strong influence of that culture in association with the ranch, especially given its namesake. An investigative journalist, George Knapp, has said that he investigated close to 100 incidents during his time researching the ranch, and trying to understand the bizarre things reported to happen there. Some people believe the UFOs are tied to extraterrestrial life, while others perpetuate that it's an experimental US government aircraft in testing. The truth is possibly that it's a bit of both, but that's my own theory, so believe what you want and don't think I'm trying to convince you. It's Tom saying that, not me, just so y'all know. The livestock mutilations are probably the next most associated thing with Skinwalker Ranch. But not only have the strange mutilations colored the reputation of the ranch, but on the nearby highway that runs through the property, there have been at least 15 fatal accidents on this road, which was something that I found while researching the mutilations. Seriously, if you are interested in this ranch, then do some research of your own on it. You can find some pretty wild things in regards to the ranch that I really don't have the time to go into. With such a long history and such frequent strange occurrences, it really is its own iceberg at the moment. And the things that happen there are so varied, yet if you think about it from the standpoint of UFOs and strange creatures, and the reports of devices emitting electromagnetic fields, then they really are all kinds of connected. Or at least possibly so. Beliefs aside, whether you believe in the supernatural or extraterrestrial life, there is no denying that Skinwalker Ranch is a bizarre place full of unknown entities and mysteries that may never be solved in our lifetime. And, for the foreseeable future, I think there will never be a time when there is not at least one team that is actively researching the land, and trying to garner answers to mysteries that are now approaching 100 years old. The land was first owned by Kenneth and Edith Myers from 1934 until 1994. By the time they had sold the property, it had already built a reputation as a strange and enigmatic place, with UFOs, the bulletproof cryptids, and the strange electromagnetic fields. I'm not sure if the Myers themselves ever actively investigated the supernatural occurrences personally, but they certainly weren't opposed to letting researchers come onto the land and see what they could learn, or what they might experience for themselves. In 1994, the Shermans bought the ranch, and the name of the land was officially changed to Sherman Ranch. But they would own the property until 1996, when they sold it to Robert Bigelow, who spent a lot of money and time investigating the strange happenings on the infamous ranch. In 2016, Bigelow sold the ranch to the current owner, who seems to have continued Bigelow's research efforts in trying to solve some of the mysteries that plague the ranch, and have for over 70 years. The place certainly has garnered quite the reputation, and it's curious to think about what it is about this specific area of land, only 512 acres, that makes it so strange, that makes it such a hotbed for supernatural and possibly the extraterrestrial. Perhaps it's the remote location that attracts the UFOs. The strange electromagnetic fields could be part of tests conducted by the US military, as most would have you believe anyway. or the extraterrestrials that are reported on the ranch, and in the UFOs that make such frequent appearances here. There are a lot of critics of Skinwalker Ranch that say that the reputation it has is completely based on fabricated events. The NIDSI that had monitored the ranch for years and spoken to former owners of the property claimed that no evidence of any supernatural occurrences have been observed, and that the former owners claimed that no supernatural events happened during their time on the ranch, which is a bit odd, given the earliest stories spoke of the Myers who had bought the land and then had all kinds of strange things begin to happen. So, as with most things, this might be 100% accurate, and there are no paranormal things that have happened. But if that's the case, then why do reports and stories of strange occurrences keep coming up? The southwest part of the US is still a very wild and untamed land, with huge sections that are completely uninhabited by humans. So many remote spots, and when you leave civilization behind, then absolutely anything can happen to you when you're in the middle of nowhere. For if a place as well known as Skinwalker Ranch can have strange and deadly phenomena, then how many other remote places could be even worse? Since I discovered cameras and how to use them, I have always wanted to be a photographer. I would take photos of anything I could. People, animals, cars, nature, anything I found cool or worthy of capture. This led me to my career now as an adult as a freelance photographer. I do a part-time job to help pay some of the bills, as I'm not as big named as the others, but this still gives me the opportunity to take photos for myself and others, and I love it. In 2009, I started getting more into photographing abandoned places. With the housing crash in 2008, I found a lot of abandoned homes, and yes, I let myself in to capture some of them. It was kind of eerie how some of them were completely cleaned out, like the owners expected, and the others that seemed to barely take anything. It actually won me an award for a local contest that I entered, so around this time I was looking for other abandoned places that weren't houses, and I found some factories and an old commercial building. But this story is actually about an old radio tower in rural Nevada that I found on a forum. I had been looking on several urbex forums for good places to check out. Those guys are great to follow because they typically know the ins and outs of abandoned places, which ones are okay to access, and which ones to watch out for, because they have trespassing signs posted. This radio tower, however, had nothing posted either way, saying you could not enter or if it was open to the public to see. Someone said they had been there as a recommendation, but didn't stay long because it gave them some weird vibes. And that's also something you heard about. I wasn't planning on doing much other than taking some photos, and I was itching for a mini getaway, so I made some plans to check it out. I had fixed days off on Sunday and Monday, and I made my plans around those days. And because I was expecting it to be a little over 6 hours to drive there, stay in a hotel nearby, and then drive back home, I didn't tell anyone about it. The drive there was fine, no issues, and it was nice and cool, cooler than I was expecting. But the last 5 or so miles to the radio tower were gravel and rough, and I cringed every time I heard a clunk of rock hitting my car. The further I went down those roads, the more and more alone I felt. No one was around, and the dirt road was off one of the highway exits that was probably only used by folks that lived in the area. The only thing within my sight were old, dead bushes and sagebrush sprinkled around. It only made me a little regretful when I noticed that my cell service was going in and out. However, once I saw the radio tower in the distance and got closer to it, the better I was feeling about the whole thing. The tower was still standing strong. About 300 feet tall, I would guess, with a small concrete base. All of it looked weathered and covered in decades-old graffiti. I walked around it to see my options, and then spent a couple of hours shooting the exterior. I was trying to take a lot of good shots, but also not to take too long because I wanted to try to get inside while there was still light. I didn't intend on stopping at it the next day, and was planning on just heading straight home from the hotel. But it was probably around 4 p.m. when I got there, so I had to hurry. The main door was shut and not budging. I'm not sure if it was locked or just rusted shut or something, but there was a broken window that I could fit in. I assumed that was how the others were doing it too. I called out to see if anyone was in there, and when I didn't get a response, I climbed through. The inside was about what I expected. Stripped equipment racks, some trash strewn about on the ground, and some old office furniture. I was taking photos of the worn-out furniture and the control panel when I heard what sounded like tires on gravel coming from outside. I wanted to believe that it was just another explorer coming to check the place out since the tower was starting to get more traction on the forum, but I also had to consider that it was just someone from the area, or maybe even the owner of the property. They could join me, or they could tell me to leave, which was understandable. I was planning on leaving soon anyways. I looked out the window that I had come in through and saw a rusted-out truck now parked next to my little car. I watched an older man get out. He looked like he was probably in his late 60s. He looked bald, but he was also wearing a baseball cap, and he had a pretty wiry-looking goatee going on. I watched as he walked around my car and looked through the windows. He then put his hand on the hood of my car, maybe to feel if it was still warm, and then he started walking toward the tower. I thought it was best to go ahead and just leave, give a friendly smile, explain what I was doing, and be on my way. I've only been confronted a few times on these adventures, and they've only ever told me the same, and nothing else ever came of it. In fact, one of the cops that stopped me actually asked about my job, and showed interest in the photos, which was pretty cool. So I was kind of expecting a similar interaction here. I would have much preferred that too. I started climbing through the window as I watched him kneel and feel on the underside of my car. That one, I was unsure of what he was doing. I climbed out with a small thump as I landed on the ground that the man heard. He turned and looked at me and slowly stood up, dusting his knees off. He greeted me with a nod and a hello. His voice was surprisingly softer than his rugged appearance. I smiled back and said hello while holding up my camera. I explained how I was just taking some pictures of it, and commented how cool it looked out there in the middle of nowhere. He nodded and said that most people don't even know this place exists. I agreed and said that I didn't even know about it until I read online on a forum. Apparently this was the wrong thing to say. He shook his head and said, "No, you didn't," claiming there was nothing online about this place for a reason. I had no reason to lie about how I found this place, especially since he didn't even ask me how I knew. I offered that information voluntarily. I just told him that that was strange because it was definitely on a forum about urbex. So maybe I got lucky and found the only page about it. Then he made a comment about it all being awfully convenient that I would show up here on this specific day. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I shrugged, not having the slightest clue. He started talking about how every year on that day there was some kind of signal that he would pick up that was coming from the tower. At first he was vague, explaining that it would come in staticky, but that he would make out certain words. He didn't tell me what those words were, but he said it listed off 6, and then he could hear a beep, and the words would start again. At first I thought this was really interesting, and I'm sure it showed on my face too. I told him that the forum didn't mention any signals that anyone picked up, so that was interesting to know. But once again, he looked at me like he didn't believe me, and then asked if I was sent here to finally put an end to it. Once again, I told him I had no idea what he was talking about, and that I was only there to take some photos, literally holding up my camera. He got more aggressive at this point and said that he knew those words had to be some kind of password or code to something, and then he demanded that I tell him what they meant. He went on about how his grandfather used to work at the tower, and how he just went missing one day after leaving for work and was never seen again. I had no idea what to say at this point. This guy was going on about some secret radio code, a missing grandfather, and then he was claiming that I must be in on all of this because I was there on the day that it was broadcasting. And to be honest, I thought that was the end of me. I was in the middle of Nevada. I didn't have a clue about the area around me, and no one knew that I had even left the state. I started worrying that he was about to kidnap me, thinking I had something to do with someone missing when I wasn't even born around the time he had disappeared. I waited for him to take a breath, and then I cut in. "Wow, I'm so sorry to hear about your grandfather. That's crazy." I mentioned how I could add that to the forum to see if anyone else had any information about it, and that way I could pass along the information to him if he wanted, but said that I needed to get back to my hotel where my friends were waiting for me. I lied, hoping that maybe knowing people were expecting me that he wouldn't do anything. It was worth a shot. He walked in front of me, blocking me from my car, and demanded that I once again tell him the truth as to why I was there on that specific day, and what I knew about the code. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, and that he was freaking me out, and he needed to let me leave. He stared at me for several seconds, and I pulled my keys out, ready to use them as a weapon if need be. Finally, he stepped slightly to the side, and I wasted no time running past him into my driver's side door. I unlocked the door manually, not wanting him to have the chance to possibly open my passenger door. I then shut my door, locking it immediately, and started my car. He had turned around to face me as I put my car in drive, and then shouted something that I couldn't make out because my music was playing. The path out of there was a straight shot, so I watched him in my rear view the whole way out of there. He stood there for a few moments, then walked back to his truck and got in. That is when I started to panic again. I was worried that he would try to follow me, and God knows what he would have been willing to try behind the wheel. I sped up, going way too fast, but I wanted to get as much distance as possible between us. Once back on a paved road, I quickly went back the way that I came, hit the highway, and kept going for another hour. Thankfully, I didn't see his truck at all. Maybe he didn't see where I went, or maybe he just realized it wasn't worth it. I finally calmed down when I found a nice hotel and got a room with a window, giving me a perfect view of my car. I checked the window multiple times before I finally went to sleep. I called my friend that night, telling her what happened, and she scolded me for not telling anyone, and, well, she was right. I certainly learned my lesson with that one. She told me to tell her when I left the next morning and to give her updates when I stopped, so she knew that I was okay, and I did. Thankfully, there were no other incidents, and the drive home went fine. Once I returned, I made an account on that forum and updated them with my experience. If others were going to check it out, I wanted to not only warn them to be safe, but to tell them to probably not go alone, especially if you were a young woman like myself. They all seemed to appreciate the update, but no one said they had run into the guy, so I guess I just happened to show up on the right day, or maybe the worst day. Either way, I got some cool photos of the place, an experience that I will never forget, as well as a life lesson. I still go to some places alone, but not nearly as often. And I always let someone know my exact locations because you just don't know a person's intentions. So that, my friends, was a collection of some middle-of-nowhere stories. Stories that happen way, way outside of the borders of society? You know what? I had a really good idea for that in my head whenever I started recording, and that's why I said it like that. And then as I started saying it, it kind of just fell out of my head. Thoughts don't usually fall out of my head like that. At least not in a physical manifestation. Now it's a blob on my desk. I'm gonna poke it. Anyways, hopefully you all enjoyed these middle-of-nowhere stories. Some interesting ones today. Definitely a good mix between disappearing towns, cryptids, Urbex's weirdness, and then Tom, of course, did a fantastic write-up on the Skinwalker Ranch. I'm sure he could have made that go for so many more words, but I kind of appreciate him stopping it where he did. Yeah, he's a good man, Tom. And in the description is a link to his Amazon page. I told him I would do that, and I need to start doing it because it's the best way to do things. Be more supportive of my friends that help me out with these things. So, anyways, Tom is a great man, but he can be a bit verbose. He likes words as much as I do. And yeah. So, anyways, thank you, Tom, for the write-up, and thank you to everyone else who submitted your stories to the channel. You guys are amazing. Hopefully you enjoyed the stories. If you did, please do hit that like button, the like button on the video. If you're new to the channel and enjoyed what you heard, please consider subscribing. That'd be amazing of you. You can also join Patreon or memberships to get early access to content like this, as long as it goes up early. Today I'm a bit behind. Sorry about that. If you're feeling bold, you can go down below the video and leave me a comment with your thoughts on the stories or how you're doing, anything you want to talk about, how your weekend's gone so far, any plans for the week. As you all know, my plans involve moving and doing more work, so there's that. Yeah, you can also listen to the podcast on other platforms like Spotify, Audible, Apple Podcast, all those. I'm available pretty much everywhere. Just search As the Raven Dreams. Send your stories into astheravendreams.com. And please, keep being the amazing person you are. That's all I ask of you. Hope you're having a beautiful weekend, friends. Hope I see you again here soon. But until then, remember that you are loved, you are valid, that you are important. You're the best you that you can be. Don't forget it. Until next time, much love and sleep well.